Hello, and welcome once again to It's a Frankly Hairy podcast. I'm your host, Frank Weber. So glad that you could join me today in the forest. I have several hairy-chested topics that we're going to get into on this show. I'm actually doing a little switching the schedule around, rearranging some episodes. I had an original plan here for the rest of September, and this episode today I really needed to get out as soon as possible because apparently some states have already started to early vote. It's only mid-September and the election isn't until November 5th. I thought that was very odd, and there's potential issues with votes being taken in so early, but that's another topic for another day. And I'm also doing some batch recording, another kind of big episode right after this. But anyway, the reason I'm shuffling the schedule is to talk to you about the upcoming election and essentially how to vote. Now, by how to vote, I'm not actually going to tell you who to vote for. That's not really my prerogative. I mean, it's totally going to be up to you when it's all said and done. But I'm going to go over a process, a fairly simple one, and one with some critical thinking that I hope you will employ before you go to the polls and cast your votes this year. Every election is important. This one is no different. I don't know that it's necessarily more important than any of the others, but it could be very key. You never really know what's going to happen in this country, in this world, and I'm going to get into all of that in a little bit. But first, I wanted to tell you, the ideal candidate out there is ideally going to be yourself. But yourself, as well as myself, are not running, and so there's no way to go out there and campaign and vote for ourselves. So what I implore you to do, of course, is research, one time, two times, three times, many times, as many times as you often need to vote. That was supposed to be a joke, but I just screwed it up there. Of course, you can only vote once, but the emphasis here is that you're supposed to only research. You're only supposed to vote once, but you can research as much as possible about the candidates and their values and their policies. See where they stand. Do they correlate with what you believe in? You have to ask yourself, too, if you are better off now than you were 4 years ago. That's a particularly important question as it pertains to Kamala Harris, since she was in the Biden administration, or still is in the Biden administration. So do all those things. It sounds pretty simple. Another thing that I would advise against, though, is do not be a single issue voter. The world is a very complicated place with many, many issues. There is a big picture out there, and try to figure out what that big picture is for yourself. But please do not vote just based on one issue. I have an example here to try to illustrate that. My brother and I, once or twice, have talked about the very controversial, divisive, all-or-nothing issue of abortion. And we never really discussed pro-life versus pro-choice, and this discussion is also not about that. But our question to each other was, we don't seem to know anybody who has ever had an abortion or who has been tangentially affected by one. That's to our knowledge. It's possible that we have, in fact, met somebody, but they don't divulge such information, so we really don't know. The point of all this is to tell you that based on the general population, we don't really believe that abortion as an issue is that prevalent out there. Based on our experience, we don't know what the number is, how many abortions happen per 1,000 people, for instance. And because of that, it seems like a limited issue, unlike the economy and inflation, the immigration, the very porous southern border, world affairs, potential for World War III or nuclear war. That seems to be more present now than a few years ago. Those things affect everybody. And this is not, of course, to diminish abortion as an issue, but it's meant to try to put it into some perspective in order to take some of the emotion and the division and the vitriol out of it. Where does it really place in a ranking of all the issues that people should be voting on in this election? And there is a big picture out there, and so I implore you and encourage you to try to find out what that is as you do your research. I always think politics as something of a sort of kayfabe, like professional wrestling, which makes it kind of a joke, but then they're in a values-based profession that definitely impacts our lives. And, we need to take these elections seriously, and then also how voting is actually done in certain places and tallied afterwards. Like I said, that's a different subject, but please don't take this for granted and go out and exercise your right to vote, just once, of course, this November, or possibly a little earlier if you're doing the early voting. So I try to make that clear cut, hopefully not too obvious. I know there's a lot of people out there who are big thinkers like myself and already know all that stuff. But then I feel like there's a lot of people out there who don't and are caught up in kind of their own movie, living their own movie, or some kind of a fantasy life out there. And all this stuff is quite important. Can't emphasize it enough. I wanted to talk a little bit about, since we were talking about abortion and then the origins of division in this country, I really feel like most of the division has come about through the media of various forms, whether it's TV media, print media, and more recently, of course, internet and social media. And I feel like those sources really have a big role in swaying opinion one way or another. Since at least the 1990s, I noticed it a lot in the 1992 election, which was a complicated election with Clinton and Bush the Elder and Ross Perot and all that. And Clinton ultimately won. The media really, I think, wanted him to win in that election, and they kind of took on a new character of their own then. And that was before the internet. That was really the most remarkable thing about that. But I really believe the most of the division in this country is being sown by various media sources, most of them who are left-leaning and left-persuaded. I give you an example of that. Everybody knows that in 2020, the COVID virus came from Wuhan, China, and the media initially gave this narrative that it came from a wet market where food was being sold and whatnot. But of course, there's a big viral lab that is also there in Wuhan. And during that year, anyway, if Trump or another right-leaning politician said, oh, the virus came out of the Wuhan lab, they would be censored for it through various platforms. And then the media would later write things like, this person incorrectly said that the virus came from the Wuhan lab. Putting the word incorrectly into a narrative on what was said is supposed to make the politician look bad, and by contrast make the media look somewhat good, although kind of judgmental. And those are the kind of games that they play in order to sway people's opinions. And of course, since that time, that's been like 4.5 years ago now, since that breakout of COVID happened, the evidence seems to be favoring the lab leak theory more and more since then. And a lot of those sources haven't corrected themselves either. But honestly, I think that's where a lot of the division in this country happens. You have to watch where you get your news. Most news is honestly kind of depressing. There's not a ton of good news in there. You have to kind of watch yourself because you don't want to get into a depression or commit suicide or anything like that, because when you hear about wars in other places and bad economic data and all sorts of things. I don't want to go too much more into this, but I think that's the main source, and they spin things in a huge way, exaggerate and hype. Just kind of like they hyped the debate the other night. Maybe Kamala won, but it didn't move the needle as far as changing anybody's minds one way or the other. I always thought that, going back to the 90s, I'm always hard on the 90s. Compared to today, the 90s would be a paradise, by the way. I don't know if you believe that or not, but something changed back then. A lot of the media outlets moved to the left, or started moving to the left. Fox News came on the scene in 96, and they may lean to the right, but I thought compared to the other outlets, they were actually much more centrist, yet they get accused of being to the right because they're right of the other places, if that makes sense. So, and then, of course, in recent years, they didn't really help Trump in 2020, and there's some other conservative outlets, some of whom would be labeled as far right, although I don't know if that's entirely correct. They're certainly right-leaning, like Newsmax or One America News. But I just wanted to throw that out there. That's my opinion of where our division is in this country, and I think a lot of ways we need to stay informed, but we kind of need to put down our phones and turn off the tube and turn off the computer and talk to each other more and have dialogue as much as possible. And that would make for a much better world and much better place to live, maybe even standard of living, whatnot. And then one last thing I want to talk to you about before we close this election guidance show. I've heard a number of people say that historically the United States doesn't really change too much depending on who takes office. And usually levels of prosperity, as far as having a good job, making money, doing well in the stock market, having a good life at home and for your family, that's pretty independent, really, of whether there's a Democrat or a Republican in the White House, is what has historically transpired. Things may change policy-wise a little bit. You may pay more taxes under the Democrats than you do under the Republicans. But that's historically, things don't actually change that much. However, I really think the last 3.5+ years, there's a lot of things have changed at a very incredible clip, and it's very overwhelming. It's very concerning. We've had problems at the border, southern border, for like 60 years, but it's gotten so porous since 2021. And you hear all these stories about immigrants and committing crimes and doing heinous things, and nothing wrong with people coming here legally and being vetted and being productive in their lives as new Americans. My wife is an immigrant after all. But if you are here illegally and have some other agenda, criminal or otherwise, then that is not good for the citizens who should come first on that topic. And then we have a lot of inflation, some economic concerns. Basic goods at the grocery store are higher than they've been, and we got there fairly quickly. We have a destabilized world, concerned about nuclear war. So while the historical information suggests things don't change that much, one person can get into office and change things mightily in a few years, or whoever is actually in charge. And so that seems to be, like I said, very, very true here in these last few years. But anyway, it makes all the more the difference to go out and vote, and do so in the way that I have prescribed for you. Again, I didn't suggest any particular candidates, but you please go out and make a very informed decision, multiple issue, big picture type thinking, hopefully critical thinking, before you cast your ballot this fall. So anyway, that's about a wrap for this show. I think I said all that I needed to say. Gosh, I really wish the voting joke had come out a little bit better. But anyway, just thank you again for joining me. So glad that you can be here and be a part of this and believe in this show. It wouldn't happen without you, and I'm always exploring new ideas, new concepts to tackle, trying to be a little funnier as well. So as always, please tell your friends and family about The Forest here on It's a Frankly Harry podcast, and hit subscribe. Just thank you so much, and go out there and vote here in 2024. Thank you. Bye.